welcome to September's edition of Ballotpedia Insights. I'm Sarah Rozier. I'm Ballotpedia's Director of Strategic Partnerships, and we are happy to have you tuning in today. We're, I think, 42 days pre-election. It's a countdown we like having this time of year, every cycle. In 2020, we've been focusing, as you guys know, our insights on prominent figures who are engaging in the discussion around the divisions of our country, what it looks like to run for office, and how to engage in the political process. And today, that's what we're going to be talking about, specifically how to engage locally as you're thinking about ways you can make a difference. What does it look like to campaign for a local position? And to do that, we're going to be talking today with Mr. Theno. And he is a veteran campaign consultant who has advised and managed dozens of successful campaigns for local and state candidates throughout the Midwest. He was the second youngest person ever elected to the Wisconsin State Senate at the age of 25, which earned him then re-election 3 times by wide margins in a district that heavily favored the opposing political party. That's quite a feat, as we all know, in today's political climate. He also won election twice to his hometown, and today he's here to discuss his book, which is an easy-to-follow guide for organizing a successful local campaign. And we're going to touch on what that means generally, and also what it means during a pandemic like we're seeing this year in an unprecedented election cycle. So before we get started, I want to go ahead and remind everyone that the spirit of Ballotpedia Insights is to hear from legal scholars, political scholars, everybody across the spectrum, and subject matter experts from a wide variety of backgrounds and opinions. If you have anybody who you'd like to see on a future Ballotpedia Insights, please email us and let us know, and we'll do our best to include them in an upcoming Ballotpedia Insights. So thanks for joining us today, Dan. Thank
you for having me, Sarah.
Yeah, if you have any questions as we go along and as you're listening, either on Zoom or if you're tuning in to Facebook Live, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the Zoom chat or on the Facebook Live, which will be monitored by a Ballotpedia staffer. So let's kick it off with just a general overview. We love local elections at Ballotpedia, and I'd like to start off just talking a little bit about your background. What made you decide to run for office, and what was the genesis in your decision to write the book?
Well, I've been involved in politics since I was in high school, and as you mentioned, I was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate 4 times, first time at the age of 25, in an election that people in my own party said there's no way a 25-year-old kid could get elected in a district that was 2 to 1 in favor of the opposing political party. Well, I fooled everybody. And since then, I've been involved in volunteering to help candidates, mainly for state and local office, because I think it's very important that we build our political system starting at the ground level. In the year 2000, I was helping a friend down in Ohio, and he was running for the Ohio House of Representatives, and we were out putting yard signs up, and he said, Dan, you know a lot about politics and how to win elections. You really ought to write a book. And I had let that simmer for a while, and then when I retired in 2007 and moved back to Wisconsin, I decided now is the time to spend some evenings working on a book. It took me about 8 years to write the book. Various editors. I, of course, did not work on it full time, but labor of love, because I very strongly feel that one of the things that we often pass over is the importance of local elections. There's plenty of consultants and experts out there helping candidates run for Congress, the United States Senate, or governorships, but there's very little or limited help out there for assisting local candidates to run for local office. One of the problems I've run into time and time again is that there are an awful lot of good people at the local level who would love to become involved in politics. They just don't know how to get started, or they're afraid of the political process. So I wrote this book that was recently published called Winning Local Elections. It's not a book of theory, political theory at all. It's very practical suggestions on organizing, going door to door, techniques in going door to door, the types of political ads that a person might run in a local newspaper or a local radio station, how to raise funds, how to organize a campaign committee, just really, really basic things that give a person some confidence that they can run for a local office anywhere in the United States, for a municipal office, county office, or even the state legislature. So that's really what the book is geared toward, is the types of elections that we often overlook in our political process, but are extremely important, building up candidates to run for higher office.
What do you think is the biggest consideration somebody should make before even deciding to run for local office? What made you want to run, and what are the most important considerations somebody should have before running?
A good question. I think, first of all, you have to have confidence in yourself. And I think that it's very important that uh, you run the idea by friends and relatives and see what they think about you for a local office. If the best man at your wedding keels over laughing hysterically, maybe you ought not to run. So the first thing is to get the pulse of your friends and relatives and people in the community that you know. Uh, what are your chances? Take a look objectively at your ability to win an election, your ability to organize an election, and look at the opponent. Is the opponent beatable? Um, is the opponent someone that really needs to be replaced if it's an incumbent? And then take a look at what types of support networks you can develop, especially at the local level with your friends and relatives and people that support you politically. You need to have a ground game with your friends and relatives at the local level, because at the local level we're not talking about massive TV advertising. We're talking about boots on the ground, hitting the doors, having events, doing a lot of speaking on radio and interviews, and doing some of the basic things that are done at the local level.
Yeah, so thinking about that, setting aside what 2020 looks like, in a normal election year, what do you suggest to a candidate starting his or her campaign as the three most important, or however many you want to give us, the most important things to be doing in a campaign cycle?
Well, this campaign cycle is unusual because of the pandemic. I was advising three candidates running for local office here in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I live. Our local elections in Wisconsin are in April, and I was helping three candidates that were very well qualified, an 18-year incumbent, one for the city council and one for the county board. I was advising a third candidate that was running against incumbent, a very, very highly qualified candidate, a young man in his middle 30s, very intelligent, very articulate. He should have won the race, but he didn't. And what happened was 2 weeks before the election, in mid-March, he called me and said, Dan, people are not very receptive to people going door to door because of the pandemic. I'm having people not come to the door, or I'm having people not want to speak to me. He said, what do you think? Should we cut out and do maybe an extra mailing? So that's what we did. And election day came and he lost by 7 votes, just 7 votes. If he would have had another day or two campaigning door to door, I'm sure he would have won the election. So this election cycle is difficult for local candidates. They have to rely on mailings, such things as the electronic media, social media, but it's very, very difficult to go door to door or to even have any events. So this election cycle is totally different than any I've ever seen.
Those stories, when you think about people losing by slim margins, like 7 votes, are just, they're so reinforcing and important to talk about when we think about why it's important to go vote this cycle, what it really means, how maybe some of the bigger races will be decided by very large margins, but especially in local races, looking from the top all the way down to the bottom of your ballot can be so important when there are such tight margins. Wow. I can't imagine what what he went through in his brain when he saw those results. Oh my gosh. Oh. So then thinking about
when I called him and told him he lost by 7, couldn't believe it.
oh geez, man. Yeah, that's a heartbreaker. So one thing that we like to talk about Ballotpedia a lot is what it's looked like to participate in debates and town halls, and we've tried to do a few things this cycle to make it easier for candidates to still be participating in those kind of engaging with the candidates, but virtually. What have you noticed, thinking pre-2020, what have you noticed as how town halls and debates have evolved throughout your career?
Well, I think like what has happened in the political atmosphere in general, things are becoming more partisan, more polarized. That even is affecting things at the local level. And I think it's unfortunate that so many local candidates are getting caught up in extreme partisanship, even candidates running for nonpartisan offices. And so that has become a new challenge that has evolved in the last 10 or 15 years that we didn't see in local elections prior to that.
If you had to recommend to a candidate you're consulting with to go to maybe 1 or 2 events, if you could only choose just a handful of events to go to in their local community, are there events that throughout your career you've noticed have more impact than others? Or if you were to really think about what effort to put into in-person events, where do you usually send candidates to most frequently?
Well, other than door to door, when you talk about events, I always tell candidates that just remember, for every vote that you can take away from your opponent, mathematically, you gain 2 votes. Your opponent loses a vote and you gain a vote. So you're 2 votes ahead. I always recommend candidates to be unafraid to go to events that are maybe populated by people that would be non-supportive of your candidacy. Go into the lion's den. You might convert some of the people there that, by golly, you're a decent person, you're a trustworthy person, you're not wrong on the issue. I always advise candidates, go in the lion's den, try to garner some votes away from your opponent if you're really serious about conducting a very strong campaign.
When you mentioned every vote you take away from your opponent is technically 2 votes for you, that made me think that poor guy from this cycle, if he had been able to knock on 4 doors of his opponents.
I know. It was tough. It was
Oh
tough.
man.
But hopefully he'll run again.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd have a good chance if you were. Okay, so what are some things you've noticed this cycle that successful candidates have been doing to react to the difference in this COVID environment?
A lot of candidates are doing more mailings, they're doing more social media, and they're doing more personal contacts by phone. I've had candidates that would spend 2 or 3 hours every night phoning people off of voter lists. So it's still very personal at the local level, but it's different. Obviously, the one thing that I always tell candidates at the local level is the most important thing to do is to go door to door, meet people. Well, we can't do that right now, obviously. So you have to invent other things to do to get to the people. But personal contacts, setting up phone banks, doing more mailings, those type of things are very effective And we're seeing a lot of that this go around because of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So being based in Wisconsin, is there anything that you think is unique to what's been happening? I know it's a state that everybody is focused on for the presidential level. Do you see that trickling down to attention at local level for Wisconsin races?
Not so much for local races because our local races are in April, but it's certainly having an impact on state legislative and congressional races. It's becoming very partisan. I think that people across the country are going to know the geography of the Badger State more than they want to, maybe by election day. It's very tight here. It's very partisan. The airwaves are just filled with ads from both camps for the presidential race. Both candidates and both vice presidential candidates are blanketing the state of Wisconsin. So things are very tight here. It's starting to lean a little bit towards Biden, but it's still very tight. And I think the next 6 weeks are going to be very interesting. That partisanship that we see at the national level is trickling down again to some of the lower races in the state legislature and for Congress.
Is that something you noticed throughout your tenure in the legislature as well, as kind of just an increase in partisanship, or how did that evolve over your 4 terms in the legislature? Did you notice a difference from start to finish, or what were your biggest takeaways from your time there?
I was in the state Senate in Wisconsin in the 70s and 80s. Things were less partisan then. You didn't consider the opposing political party members as enemies. I think things have gotten so extremely partisan. People in our state capitals and out in Washington of various political parties cannot even talk to one another. That's very unfortunate. I think a real primary cause of that is the whole issue of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering of legislative districts and congressional districts has gotten so technical with the use of computer technology that the majority party in state legislature can pretty much decide who their voters are going to be. And the problem with that process is that gerrymandered Republican districts tend to elect very conservative Republicans. Gerrymandered Democrat districts tend to elect very liberal Democrats. But when those very conservative Republicans and very liberal Democrats get together at a state capitol or in Washington, they have nothing. So you have this polarization of the political process that is affecting things at the local level, but it's tearing the political process apart. And I really feel that state after state, we take a look at how to end gerrymandering so that we have fair elections in every one of our states. The Iowa plan is one that I think is really super. They have an independent agency drop the legislative districts and congressional districts and then have an up or down vote in the Iowa state legislature. The state legislature in Iowa has narrowed down the maps in the 30 some years it's been in existence. We need to have a system like that in Wisconsin as well as many other states, because again, I think that particular issue of unfair maps, of gerrymandered maps, of politicians deciding who their voters should be has got to end. We have got to treat each other with respect. We have to have compromises to move our states and our country forward. And the pandering has manifested itself in the very, very partisan nature that we're seeing at all levels of government right now.
Well, and it's so interesting because what you just were discussing, which is the census and what happens after the census this year with redistricting, many states it is up to the legislature, which indicates one example of why these more state and local races are so important. Are there any other policies that you think have brought some of the political divisiveness that you're talking about that state legislators and local officials have more control over than maybe the higher profile congressional and of course president races that are given so much attention, why else would you indicate like state and local officials? What do they have a direct influence over that you view as crucial to kind of this public space?
Well, I think tax matters, spending matters, social justice issues. These all sometimes get involved in very partisan bickering back and forth. Uh, those debates are happening at the local level. In Green Bay, we are seeing a very strong set of occurrences in our community, efforts being made to try to bring the community together. Uh, Many of those issues are not partisan or should not be partisan, but they often are. But we need to respect one another, and I don't think that we have that respect. We see that in the presidential race on down, where everybody's taking a look at their opponent or un-American, and that stifles, I think, constructive debate, which this country was founded on.
Yeah, that makes sense. One question that I always love asking anybody who's kind of worked in and around politics for any number of years is, what are your favorite anecdotes? Just, we'll go first from the campaign trail, but then I do want to talk to you a little bit more about your legislative experience. But so, of course, the one about 7 votes is just jarring. But throughout your consulting or even when you were running, do you have any kind of favorite memories that you've seen just on local campaign trails?
Yes, good question. I always advise candidates running for political office to keep things simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Candidates at the local level are way too complicated, and their message gets muddied. And one example I'll give you is this. Years ago, I was in the state Senate, but I was not up for election. I was in between my term, my 4-year term, and my political party asked me to help a candidate that was running for the state assembly here in Wisconsin. That individual was the mayor of the largest community in the district, and very, very popular, very well spoken. He should have won, but he didn't because he got too complicated. We raised a lot of money for that candidate, and everything should have gone right. But every week before the election, I would call him and try to meet them and say, Frank, what are you doing with all the money that we gave you? For you? And he would say, oh, I've got this secret plan. Don't worry about it. Secret plan. The week would go by and I'd contact him again. What are you doing with the money that was raised to help your campaign? Oh, I've got this secret plan. Don't worry about it. You're going to really like it. Week after week, this went on for about 6 weeks. Got down to election day, pick up my hometown daily newspaper and open it up, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's the secret plan. This candidate didn't pay attention to keep it simple, stupid. Keep the message understandable. He had bought, or his campaign had bought, 5 pages of a daily newspaper that would cover the district. 5 pages telling everybody every issue that there was under the sun and how he felt about those issues. And I called him and I said, Frank, is there a secret plan? He said, oh yeah, isn't that great? I said, no. I said, your mother wouldn't even read that. So it's important to keep things simple, keep them straightforward. I always tell candidates, the issues are important. You have to have some issue. You have to have some reasons that you're running for a local office or for the state legislature. But the first priority is to have a good candidate and keep on message and keep it simple. Don't get overly complicated. Time after time, I've seen candidates that have lost races for the state legislature or local office because they try to overeducate the public on the issues.
Yeah, it sounds like 5 pages of policy would not be my preferred morning cup of coffee read either. Now thinking
Doesn't
about
work.
now, now thinking about campaigning still, what would be your biggest win from any of the campaigns you've consulted on? Are there any races where you didn't think you'd come out ahead and you did, or what would be your biggest success you could point to over the past few years?
Well, the biggest surprise, I guess, was my own first election. I didn't receive any money from my political party. I was 25 years old. I was in a district that was 2-1 in favor of the opposing political party. Nobody thought that kid up in Wisconsin would win. So that was probably the biggest surprise, at least in that election. There have been many elections since that have been really surprising in the outcome. Uh, just the past April, I was advising a young lady that was running against a 20-year incumbent for the county board. She had no political experience. She had never political party. And we put a campaign together. We put some issues together. We created a positive image of this outstanding young lady. She beat a 20-year incumbent by it was about she had about 65% of the vote. And nobody thought that she would win. And she won because she worked hard. She won because she had good messaging. She won because she didn't get things too complicated.
Wow. Yeah, winning 65% of the vote against a 20-year incumbent is huge. We don't often see those kind of margins when we look at our incumbent studies at Ballotpedia. So wow, congratulations. So taking the same question just to your legislative experience, during your tenure in the state Senate, what was kind of what were your biggest takeaways from that tenure, and are there any memories that you think of on a regular basis?
To the issue of partisanship. It was oftentimes that when I was in the state Senate in the 70s and 80s, whether my political party was in the majority or the minority, and I was part of both sets of members, it used to be that there was real efforts to try to develop political compromises between the parties. Uh, and those compromises led to uh, more positive bipartisan votes in the Wisconsin State Senate. You don't see that very much anymore, and that's sad because I think we're having a situation where one political party is dominating the Wisconsin legislature and no compromises are being made. So when I look back at my tenure in the Wisconsin State Senate for 4 terms, I was very proud of the fact, in looking back, that we did reach a aisle. We did try to reach compromises, and I think we got better legislation through to the governor's desk as a result. And we're not seeing that so much anymore.
Got it. Yeah, it is really just fascinating to think back over the past 30 years, just how things have changed. Now, one thing our readers had asked about is what do you view as kind of the biggest waste of campaign time in any given cycle? Is it we know that your top things for a candidate to do revolve around door knocking and making sure that they're getting face-to-face interaction. Is there anything that a lot of campaigns do that you see as not as useful, not as fruitful? What do you think is the biggest time waster some candidates do?
Well, I think the biggest time waster, and that's a good question, especially at the local level, is not having a campaign organization. I've seen really, really good candidates lose elections because they try to do everything themselves. The first thing I do when I sit down with a candidate that asks me for assistance is to say, well, what type of campaign organization are you talking about? Do you have a chairman? Do you have a manager? Do you have a treasurer? Do you have somebody that can get out the yard signs? Do you have somebody that can organize coffees, etc.? It is very important at every level of campaigning, but especially at the local level, that you have a good campaign organization. And the time waster in campaigns that fail is when the candidate is doing all the work and not spending the time meeting the people. The candidate in any local or state legislative race, because we're talking about grassroots campaigning here, needs to be out attending events, giving speeches, um, going about doing interviews with the media, knocking on doors when that's allowable, and not doing things that other people could do. A candidate should not be worrying about getting out yard signs. A candidate should not worry about organizing coffees. So the more a candidate for a local office is organized, the more successful that will be and the less time that candidate will be wasting doing mundane things, but important things, but doing those things and taking away time meeting the people.
Kind of related to campaign wasters, what's the worst political advice you've ever received?
That I've ever received? Um, Me personally, I when I was running for state legislature here in Wisconsin, I would often get suggested uh, uh, comments to make before organizations or suggested news releases that came out of Madison that were much too partisan and not fitting my district. I usually put them in the wrong file and did my own, simply because a candidate must have a pulse of his or her district. And oftentimes, people that are organizing state legislative campaigns from a state capital do not understand the intricacies of issues at the local level in a campaign in a district that's 300 miles away.
Now, on the flip side of that, just to kind of close us out, and if anybody does in the Zoom have any questions they'd like to ask, please let us know. But I always do like asking the flip side of that, which what is the best advice, and we can even make it political or not political, that you received as you were starting off your career, just as our listeners start thinking about how they can get involved in their governments?
I think it's important to listen to people that might not agree with you ideologically or partisan wise, but reach out to them because, again, mathematically, you earn 2 votes for every vote that you can change from your opponent. And I think that if you try to reach out to people that would normally be politically opposed to your candidacy, the better you're going to do in the election and the more effective you're going to be after the election. I would tell you this story. There was a large organization in the largest city, my district, that opposed my campaign vigorously, supporting my opponent in my first election. The first organization I went to the day after I was elected was a meeting of this organization. I walked into the room and all jaws dropped. But that organization never supported me in the next 3 elections, but they didn't oppose me very strongly either. So I think it's important to reach across the aisle, reach across to people that are your opponents, see if you can get about talking about things that you agree on instead of things that you would normally disagree on.
Yeah, I think the addition of the, hey, they didn't support me the next 3 cycles, but they didn't oppose me. I think that's a crucial thing to think about just as you're writing out campaign strategy, is how to at least make people not oppose you. I like that a lot. Well, this was, sorry, go ahead.
Say the best advice my campaign chairman, when I was running for the state senate, told me, he said, never burn bridges behind you. And so you don't want to make people that might oppose you forever. Try to reach out to them, try to get them on your side. I talk a lot about that in my book because it's important that once you are elected, to the state legislature, to a mayor, a city council, whatever, you've got to listen to all the people. And I think that's one of the problems seeing at the national level is that we're so partisan and we're so inclined to think of the opposing political party as the enemy that we're not making compromises, we're not reaching out to learn from one another and to put the interest of the state or the country ahead of partisan political advantage. And it is the message that I hopefully get through in my book. It's a message that if we are to move forward as a country.
That makes sense. And one thing that came to mind as you were just saying that is I've never seen my congressman at the grocery store, but I've definitely seen my state senate and my state house members and my local school board member just walking around the town. And so this idea of, especially at state and below, it's so important to connect with your voters. If they weren't there, if they weren't in support of you last cycle, maybe just running into them could change their mind in future years and future ballots. Who knows?
One of the sad things in our political system is that when local races are conducted at times out of sync with races for the state legislature, or Congress, or president, we have such a low vote out. But I'm very wanting to get the message across to people that these local races are extremely important. A congressman doesn't care about garbage collection or safety in a park, drug houses in your neighborhood, filling potholes. The local issues that affect people at the basic level, the things that talk about community progress, the things that talk about community safety, and the type of community that you live in. Those are issues that are decided at the local level, not the state level, not in Washington, D.C. It is important that people get out and vote in these local races. It's important that we encourage good, responsible people to run for office.
On that note, where can people find your book? Where's the best place for them to buy it? Oh, I think our feed might have dropped for a second. Where's the best place that people can find your book to learn more?
My book, Winning Local Elections, is available at Amazon.com for $14.95. I'm not rich writing book. Promoting the book, I do want people to for local office to pick up a copy of the book, read through it, and I certainly would be available to talk to anyone that has read the book, contact me if they have any questions at all, because I, again, think my mission, my personal mission, is to help as many people as I can to run for local office.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Dan. And this was Ballotpedia's September edition of Insights. Like I mentioned at the top of the call, if you have any thoughts or suggestions for future guests, please feel free to email us at editor@ballotpedia.org, and we will talk to you soon. Enjoy the last few weeks of the cycle.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.